Most of Canada is moving away from lockdown mode during the COVID-19 pandemic, but Prime Minister Justin Trudeau recently announced that the Canada Emergency Response Benefit will be extended for another 8 weeks. This may be causing some concern for employers. To talk more about it is one of our regular contributors, Brian Lilley. Brian, are people not wanting to go back to work?
No, they're not. And a lot of people are nervous about going back to work. Others are saying, well, I was only getting 15, 20 hours a week. I say that I've not working due to COVID, I can get $2,000 a month for staying home and doing nothing. If you're working full time, it doesn't matter where you are in the country. If you're working full time, minimum wage is going to be more than $2,000 a month. But if you're working part time, you might be getting a pay raise based on this CERB. Or maybe it's a bit of a wash for you and you just say, well, it's $2,000 and I don't have to leave home. I can stay home. I can look after the kids. I can, the whole gamut of things. It could be you just want to stay home and play video games. Who knows? Employers are telling government we are having trouble getting people to go back to work. So watch for this to be an issue, one that the government's going to have to carefully dance around, because Justin Trudeau has been all about spending money. He's been all about making sure that every group is looked after, that they get cash. He was even reluctant to go after people that were committing fraud. If you remember, we talked about that several weeks ago. Civil servants were saying, hey, wait a minute, we've got maybe 200,000 people collecting this that shouldn't be getting it. That works out to $400 million a month. And they just said, oh, don't worry about it, keep paying it. Now they realize, okay, this is turning into multi-billion-dollar fraud. They've started to say they'll crack down on it. But, how do they walk back the CERB? How do they say, you're no longer going to get this money, go out and work? A lot of people will be angry and upset, and I think there is still a possibility of a fall election. Justin Trudeau doesn't like this minority thing. He wants to go back to majority territory. Taking money away from people doesn't win you votes.
But he has the support of the NDP right now for non-confidence votes. So, as long as he keeps doling out the money, maybe the NDP will support him. Will that be enough, though?
Well, the NDP support him, but not on going after people who are fraudulent. We're not when the Liberal government says we're going after people that shouldn't be getting CERB. They're not talking about someone who applied in good faith, thinking they were eligible, and they're not, but they're still getting it. We're talking about people who were actively trying to defraud the government, and the NDP doesn't even want them to go after that. So, in this current situation, they actually have to find ways to strike deals, one-offs perhaps at different times with each of the parties, because they've all got their areas or issues that they want looked after, and the government needs to find compromise with them.
A story we recently aired on BCN was how the Canada-U.S. border will remain closed until at least July 21st, outside of the the essential workers. Brian, what is really driving this?
At the beginning, it was cases in border states, places like Washington in British Columbia, or Michigan, which borders Ontario, New York State, which borders Ontario and Quebec.
And Montana here with Alberta. So there you go. We're really close.
But Montana didn't have a lot of cases. But those other three had a ton of cases. They were absolute basket cases. Now you're starting to see California go back up. You're starting to see Arizona. You're starting to see COVID resurface in a lot of areas. And as the U.S. starts to see spikes again before they're even ready to hit a second wave, Canadian officials are saying, whoa, wait a minute, we're not liking the look of this. So that's kind of what's driving it right now, be it North Carolina or Arizona or California, rather than our initial fear, which was it's right on the border.
Brian, let's talk about pandemic pay for grocery workers. The extra $2 an hour disappeared as quickly as it came. Now, the major chains announced last week that they would be cutting it, and now CEOs of those companies may be called before Parliament to explain themselves.
Yeah, it was miraculous that the pay seemed to disappear on the same day for Metro, for Sobeys, for Loblaws, for Walmart. I'm going off memory, but if memory serves, I think Metro, when the pay came in, Metro announced, we're going to offer this. And then Loblaws quickly followed, and they were all kind of went along within a couple of days. I think it was last Friday, just boom, pandemic pays over. That leaves bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. I was listening to talk radio here in Toronto, and the host was taking calls on this, and he was getting people calling up and saying, wait a minute, Didn't Loblaws get millions for new fridges?
Yeah.
And they fixed the price of bread for years, and now they're taking this $2 away? Look, grocery sales are up, profits are up. This is a really bad look for the companies, especially in areas where there are still cases. If you are in rural Manitoba, there are no cases of COVID-19. Do you need the $2 extra per hour for those workers? Probably not. But if you're in a metro in, on the island of Montreal or here in Toronto or other places where there are still cases and where it is still an issue and a concern, you might want to offer this to those workers at the least. Instead, they have taken it away all at once. They've announced when it's going to end. And now MPs are saying, well, wait a minute, this doesn't seem right. We want to talk to you. So they're in discussions to have them appear before a Commons committee to answer for how this came about. It does look a little fishy when they all announce it at the same time.
The Royal Canadian Navy's Cyclone helicopters will be back in the air soon. Now, the announcement comes as the military revealed the crash in Greece was caused by a conflict between the pilot and the chopper.
Yeah, such a strange term of phrase for them to use, and then not really giving an explanation as to what the conflict was, but that something was going on between the helicopter and the pilot. We're assuming the automated pilot system, the automated flight system, and the pilot in conflict with each other, and then the helicopter went down within sight. Now, they probably know more than they say. Are saying right now, this is a habit of the Canadian military. And you'll recall at the beginning, they made it sound like nobody had seen anything and we don't really know what happened. And we found out days later, after the first news conference with the Chief of Defense Staff, with the Prime Minister, with the Defense Minister, that helicopter went down within sight of the ship that it was supposed to land back on. It went down with the Royal Canadian Navy crew watching it happen, their comrades. So my guess is that they know more than they're letting on right now. They grounded the entire Cyclone fleet at the time. They've since said that they'll be back up in the air within days. So I'm guessing by the end of the week, there'll be the crews that operate the Cyclones will be back up. But there's still a lot of questions that need answers here. It's just going to be difficult getting them from a military that doesn't like to answer to the civilians that fund them.
With more calls of tackling racism around the world, we're seeing statues being torn down, also streets being renamed. Brian, you recently asked our Prime Minister about dropping Sir Wilfrid Laurier from the name of the top Liberal Donors Club. Why is that?
Well, the top Liberal donors, if you give enough, you get to join something called the Laurier Club, and it's quite prestigious. Laurier is a hero within the Liberal Party. I remember going to one Liberal organizer's house, and people have up pictures of the Pope or presidents. They had Laurier hanging in their dining room. They're so proud of him, and he was the first Francophone Canadian Prime Minister. A lot of great accomplishments, and even some conservatives consider him to be one of the great prime ministers of the 20th century. But while he was known for an immigration policy that brought in record numbers of people, put farmers on land straight across the prairies, he also had a very racist immigration policy by today's standards, and probably even by 1903 standards. He took the Chinese head tax from $50 per person to $500 per person because Sir John A. Macdonald had brought it in at $50. They said, this isn't working. We're still getting too many people that we don't want here. They upped it. That's the equivalent of more than $2,000 in today's money. They had a policy that said you cannot have immigration from India because they said if your boat can't sail, remember there were no planes back then, if your boat can't sail directly to Canada, you can't come. The only country they were worried about that was India. And boats coming from India had to stop before they left Asia to cross the Pacific to refuel or they wouldn't make it. And then finally, there were several instances where he discouraged Black American farmers from places like Oklahoma from coming up. They sent agents down to tell them Canada's no good for you. And in 1911, he even signed an order in council, a cabinet order, banning Black immigrants. And the language in it, I don't think I could use on this television station without causing myself and yourself an awful lot of headaches, Hal. So that's the background for why the question. And I wanted to know, okay, this is something the Prime Minister could do without going to Parliament or going to bureaucrats. He essentially runs the Liberal Party. if we're going to change Langevin Block, which used to be the name of the building that the Prime Minister's office is in Ottawa, if we're going to change that, well, we know he's got a record of doing this sort of thing. What about the Laurier Club? Or what about James McGill, the man who, Justin Trudeau is a very proud alumnus of McGill University in Montreal. James McGill owned slaves. He owned slaves up until the time he died, when he bequested the money to start the university that bears his name today. He didn't really give me a direct answer, but he did say, we've got to take these things on a case-by-case basis. And I don't disagree with them. But if we're going to start tearing down statues or ripping up street names or changing place names, we need to have a conversation about it. One, we need to learn our full history, because I think what I've said will shock a lot of people. But secondly, how are we judging people? How far back are we going? What's the litmus test? What's the cutoff? Do we simply put up a plaque and tell the full story that this person was flawed? We're all flawed human beings. So that's why I was asking him. He didn't, as I said, he didn't fully answer, but he did say we've got to take this one at a time.
A Saskatchewan senator is calling for the RCMP Commissioner Bryan to be fired because she does not understand racism. This comes at the same time as a lot of criticism over the video of the arrest of Chief Alan Adams. Tell me more about that.
Well, Brenda Lucki, the RCMP commissioner, had said one day last week that there is no systemic racism in the RCMP, and then later that day or the next day, I can't remember the exact timing, the video, the dash cam video of Chief Alan Adams being arrested was released. Now, everyone's got to remember, this was a stop for a license tag that was expired. Most police officers aren't going after license tags, a little sticker on the back of your license plate. They're not going after that in the middle of the pandemic because it's tough to renew these things. We've been told in Ontario just to let them go. And Chief Alan Adams wasn't driving. You see in the video one officer trying to defuse the situation. Chief Adams at one point threatens to fight him. The officer defuses it. Things are, starting to go a bit better. And then as the first officer is arresting Chief Adams, the second officer comes flying in with a flying tackle. The timing of those two incidents, Commissioner Lucki's words and this video couldn't be worse for the RCMP. They're dealing with shootings of Indigenous Canadians across the country that are being called questionable. They're dealing with all kinds of ongoing issues. So Senator Lilley Dick says, look, this commissioner shouldn't be in the job. I would have said that for different reasons when she was first appointed. She was one of the top people in the Alberta RCMP when the High River gun grab happened. I didn't think she should ever get the job. I thought she should have been demoted along with a lot of other people after that, but she's in it now. She's since said that she believes that there is systemic racism within the RCMP. But again, if you're going to talk about racism, you've got to actually have deeds to go with it and not just mouth the words. And it seems like everyone, a lot of, the questions around this are just, will you say the right words, as opposed to, will you act the right way?
Brian, there was a time when many Canadians were excited with the fact that Harry and Meghan made BC their home. They came to Canada. It seems that they were only here for a cup of coffee, then moved to California. Their brief stay ended up costing Canada a fair bit of money.
Yeah, you stole my line, cup of coffee. You could get a lot of cups of coffee, a lot of double doubles with the amount of money that we paid. And this is only the partial bill that we know of so far. And this information comes to us from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. They found out that just the overtime and other incidental bills was $55,000. Well, that's just the overtime. Well, how much did the officers cost? How many officers were on the detail? They did not stay here very long. They were staying at the Vancouver Island estate of Frank Gustra, the guy who's into everything, mining, movies, all kinds of things. He's got a ton of money. He put them up, but we foot the bill for the security until they gave up their royal titles. And then shortly after that, of course, COVID was coming and they decided they'd rather be in LA anyway. I'd like the money back, Hal, just like they gave the money back for the renovations they did on the palace they were supposed to live in England. Maybe they could send us a check for this.
What's ironic is that COVID is not really as prominent on Vancouver Island, but in LA right now, when we talk to our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, it's rampant right now in Southern California. One of our regular contributors, Brian Lilley, joining me once again from Toronto. Thanks so much, Brian.
Thank you, Hal.